My lungs filled with ice-cold water as my car sank into the river, the brake lines deliberately severed by the man I was supposed to marry. Through the murky windshield, my fading vision caught my sister smiling from the riverbank, her fingers intertwined with his. I died choking on their betrayal. But when I gasped and opened my eyes, I wasn't drowning. I was standing in a luxury hotel suite, breathing the crisp, perfumed air of exactly 2 years ago. I was reborn. And this time, I wasn't going to fight for my fiancé. I was going to hand the poisoned bastard over to my sister on a silver platter. Death doesn't come with a warning. For me, it came on a rainy Tuesday night on the Hawthorne Bridge. I remember the sickening snap of the brake pedal hitting the floorboard, the screech of tires, and the terrifying weightlessness as my Mercedes smashed through the guardrail. But the water wasn't the coldest part. The coldest part was the agonizing realization of why I was in that car. Spencer Harrington, the golden boy of Wall Street, the CEO of Apex Capital, and the man whose ring I wore on my left hand. In my first life, I loved him with a blinding, stupid loyalty. I poured my family's trust fund into his hedge fund to save him during a market downturn. I ignored the whispers of his gambling, his violent temper, and his late-night meetings. But the ultimate betrayal wasn't financial. It was familial. When the SEC finally closed in on his massive Ponzi scheme, Spencer needed a fall guy. Actually, he needed a fall girl. And my sweet, delicate younger sister, Bethany, helped him forge the documents that put my signature on every fraudulent wire transfer. They had been sleeping together for months. As I was sinking to the bottom of the river, staring up through the distorted, freezing water, I saw them standing under the glow of the street lamp on the embankment. Bethany was wearing my favorite trench coat. Spencer had his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. They watched me die. Then came the darkness, and then the sharp stinging inhale of oxygen. I stumbled forward, my stiletto heel catching on a thick Persian rug, and crashed into a velvet armchair. My chest heaved. I clawed at my throat, expecting to cough up river water, but my throat was bone dry. "Chloe, honestly, are you drunk already? The gala hasn't even started." The voice sent a violent shockwave through my nervous system. I snapped my head up. Standing in front of the vanity mirror was Bethany. She wasn't wearing my trench coat. She was wearing a stunning emerald green silk gown. Her blonde hair was perfectly curled, and she was fastening a diamond tennis bracelet around her wrist. My eyes darted around the room. The gold leaf mirrors, the complimentary bottles of Dom Perignon on ice, the panoramic view of the city skyline. We were in the bridal suite of the St. Regis. My breath hitched as the calendar on the bedside table caught my eye. October 14th. It was the night of the annual Gallagher Holdings Charity Gala. The exact night 2 years ago when I first caught Spencer and Bethany sharing a lingering, inappropriate look by the ice sculpture. In my previous life, I had pulled Spencer aside, screamed at him in the coat check room, and demanded he stop entertaining my sister's pathetic flirting. It sparked a massive fight, painting me as the jealous, unhinged fiancé and Bethany as the innocent victim. It was the night their secret affair truly began, fueled by their shared resentment of my controlling nature. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but they were warm. They weren't blue from the freezing river. The engagement ring, a massive 3-carat oval diamond that was secretly paid for by defrauding elderly pensioners, sparkled innocently in the warm hotel lighting. I was alive, I was back. "Well," Bethany sighed, turning to face me. She crossed her arms, feigning concern, but I could see the underlying arrogance in her eyes. Are you going to just sit there, hyperventilating? Or are you going to let me borrow the sapphire drop earrings Spencer told me yesterday they'd bring out the green in my dress? Spencer told me yesterday. In my past life, that casual mention of my fiancé's private conversation with her had sent me into a blind rage. I had slapped the jewelry box shut and told her to stay away from him. This time, a slow, freezing calm washed over my burning veins. I stood up, smoothing the front of my black velvet gown. I walked over to the vanity, picked up the velvet box containing the heirloom sapphire earrings, and held it out to her. "You know what, Bethany?" I said, my voice eerily steady. "He was right. They are absolutely perfect for you. Take them." Bethany blinked, her hand freezing halfway in the air. She stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. She had been spoiling for a fight, ready to play the victim the moment I snapped. My compliance completely short-circuited her script. "Really?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Really?" I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "In fact, you two have such similar tastes. I think you understand him in ways I don't even have the patience for." I walked past her, grabbing my clutch from the bed. "I'll see you downstairs, sister. Don't keep him waiting." As I walked down the plush corridor of the hotel, my mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. Spencer Harrington was a ticking time bomb of debt fraud and ruin. Bethany wanted the glittering lifestyle, the prestige of being a Wall Street wife, and the satisfaction of stealing what was mine. "You want him?" I thought, stepping into the glass elevator and watching the city lights blur as I descended. "You can have him, and every single ounce of the destruction that comes with him." The ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes, and the suffocating perfume of the city's elite. In my previous life, I had spent this entire night hovering over Spencer like a hawk, desperate to protect my territory. Tonight, I practically melted into the shadows, a ghost observing my own history. I found them near the grand piano within 30 minutes. Spencer looked exactly as I remembered him, before the stress of federal indictments carved deep lines into his face. He was tall, impeccably tailored in a Tom Ford tuxedo, flashing that boyish, devastating smile that had conned millions out of investors. Bethany was standing far too close to him, laughing at something. He said, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. The sapphire earrings I had given her caught the light perfectly. From across the room, I watched the exact moment my sister fell entirely in love with my fiancé, or rather, his wallet. "Chloe," I turned to see my father, Robert Gallagher, approaching with a scowl. My mother, Margaret, trailed close behind him, looking nervously between me and the couple by the piano. "Why are you leaving your fiancé alone with your sister?" my father demanded in a hushed, sharp tone. "People are starting to stare. You know Bethany is overly affectionate. You need to go over there and guide him away. Don't make a scene." Ah, yes. The classic Gallagher family dynamic. Bethany was the fragile, impulsive artist who couldn't be held responsible for her actions, and I was the stoic, responsible older sister whose job was to clean up her messes and manage the fallout. Even my fiancé's wandering eye was somehow my responsibility to manage. "Dad," I said softly, adopting a mask of quiet resignation. "I don't think I'm the one he wants to be with tonight, and frankly, I'm exhausted." My mother gasped softly, pressing a hand to her pearl necklace. "Chloe, don't be dramatic. Spencer is just being polite. He's going to be her brother-in-law." "Is he?" I murmured, letting a perfectly timed tear well up in my eye. "Mom, look at them. Really look at them." They turned. Just at that moment, Spencer reached out and tucked a stray blonde curl behind Bethany's ear. It was an incredibly intimate, unmistakable gesture. My father's jaw tightened, and my mother looked away, embarrassed. I've been feeling it for weeks. I lied smoothly, playing the role of the heartbroken, dignified woman. He's distant. He lights up when she enters the room. If they have a connection, I won't be the villain who stands in the way of true love. I won't trap a man who doesn't want me. Nonsense, my father snapped, though he looked deeply unsettled. The merger between our family trust and Apex Capital is halfway through due diligence. You are not throwing away a perfectly good alliance because of a little flirting. Alliance. That's all I was to my father, a corporate merger. I'm going home, Dad, I said, turning my back on them. If Spencer asks where I am, tell him I had a migraine. I didn't wait for a response. I slipped out the side doors and into the cool night air. Over the next 2 weeks, my strategy was simple, complete and utter withdrawal. Whenever Spencer called, I kept the conversations brief and polite. When he suggested dinner dates, I suddenly had urgent board meetings. I created a massive, unfillable void in his life, and just as I calculated, Bethany rushed in to fill it. I hired a private investigator, a quiet, ruthless ex-detective named Vance. No, wait, a man named Arthur Sterling. No, scratch that. A man named Gregory Holt. Gregory bugged Spencer's penthouse suite and tracked his movements. Within 10 days, Gregory handed me a manila envelope filled with high-definition photos of Bethany entering Spencer's private elevator at 2 a.m., wearing a trench coat and nothing underneath. It was time to pull the trigger. I arranged to meet Spencer at an upscale French bistro in Midtown. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat in a highly visible booth. When Spencer walked in, he looked tense, guilt-ridden, and slightly annoyed. The classic signs of a cheating man who wants to blame his partner for his own infidelity. "Chloe," he said, sliding into the booth and checking his Rolex. "Look, I only have an hour. The markets in Asia are opening soon, and..." I slid the velvet ring box across the white tablecloth. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes dropped to the box, then snapped up to mine. "What is this?" "It's over, Spencer," I said, keeping my voice gentle, practically dripping with sorrow. "I'm releasing you." "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed, leaning forward, glancing around the restaurant. "We're getting married in 6 months." "We aren't," I said. "You're in love with her, Spencer. I see it. You see it. She sees it." He swallowed hard. He knew exactly who she was. He tried to muster a defense. "Chloe, if this is about Bethany, I swear to God you're being paranoid. We're just close." "Spencer, please," I whispered, reaching across the table to briefly touch his hand, treating him like a wounded animal. "Don't lie. It degrades both of us. You two have a passion I can't compete with. I won't force you to marry me out of obligation. I want you to be happy, even if it breaks my heart." I was mentally gagging, but the performance was flawless. Spencer stared at me completely disarmed. He had prepared for a screaming match, a hysterical woman he could gaslight and dismiss. He was entirely unprepared for total absolution. I was giving him a free pass to sleep with my sister, cloaked in the guise of self-sacrificing love. "Chloe, I never meant to hurt you," he whispered, essentially confessing. "I know," I smiled softly, standing up. "Take care of her, Spencer. She's fragile." As I walked out of the restaurant, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Gregory Holt. "Target 2 has just entered his building." I smiled, hailing a cab. The engagement was broken. Now it was time to secure the perimeter before the bomb went off. The fallout within the Gallagher family was nothing short of a theatrical masterpiece. When the news broke, my mother cried. My father yelled. and Bethany performed an Oscar-worthy routine of weeping apologies while clutching Spencer's hand in our living room. They sat on the Italian leather sofa, looking like tragic Romeo and Juliet figures facing the wrath of the world. "We didn't plan this, Dad," Bethany sobbed, pressing her face into Spencer's shoulder. "It just happened. We fought it for so long because we didn't want to hurt Chloe." I sat in the armchair across from them, sipping Earl Grey tea. I looked pale and deeply depressed, an effect easily achieved by skipping under-eye concealer for 3 days. "I've already given them my blessing," I told my father softly. "I just want peace." Because I refused to fight my parents' anger evaporated within a week. In their eyes, Bethany hadn't stolen my fiancé. Spencer had simply realized his heart belonged elsewhere, and I was brave enough to accept it. Within a month, Spencer proposed to Bethany with a diamond even larger than the one he gave me. She was over the moon. I was busy saving my own life. While Bethany was obsessing over floral arrangements and flying to Paris for dress fittings, I was sitting in the discreet downtown office of Jason Miller, a forensic accountant who owed my grandfather a life debt. "I need you to quietly disentangle every single cent of my personal trust from Apex Capital," I told Jason, sliding a massive stack of financial records across his desk. "My father still has his money tied up with Spencer, but my grandmother's inheritance is solely in my name. Pull it all out." Jason adjusted his glasses, looking over the documents. "Chloe pulling $80 million out of Apex right now will trigger massive penalties. Spencer's fund is highly illiquid right now. Why the sudden panic? Look closer at the returns, Jason," I said, leaning over the desk. "Look at the Cayman Islands subsidiaries. The returns are too consistent. Even during the tech dip last quarter, his numbers never moved. He's not trading Jason. He's paying old investors with new money." Jason froze. The blood drained from his face as his eyes scanned the highlighted ledgers I had provided. "My God, if this is true, it's a house of cards. But if you pull out 80 million, suddenly you might trigger the collapse. Then do it through a shell corporation," I instructed coldly. "File it under an obscure land acquisition blind trust. Make him think the money is just being temporarily rerouted for a real estate venture. I don't care what you have to forge or fabricate. Get my money out before the music stops." "And your father's investments?" Jason asked quietly. I paused. In my past life, I had warned my father. I had begged him to look at the books. He had called me a vindictive, jealous ex-fiancé trying to ruin Spencer out of spite. He had poured more money in just to prove a point. "My father makes his own financial decisions," I said flatly. "Just secure my accounts." The next few months were a blur of sickening extravagance. Spencer feeling the quiet pressure of my $80 million withdrawal, overcompensated by throwing money at Bethany's wedding like a madman. He needed the optics of immense untouchable wealth to keep his other investors from getting spooked. The engagement party was held at the Hamptons Country Club. 500 guests imported white orchids cascading from the ceilings and a seafood ice bar carved into the shape of swans. I arrived wearing a stunning understated black silk dress. I was playing the supportive tragic sister perfectly. Everywhere I went, people whispered about my grace and dignity. Bethany, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with gloating energy. "Chloe," she shrieked, tottering over to me in ridiculously high Louboutins. She threw her arms around me in a fake suffocating hug. "I'm so glad you came. I was so worried it would be too hard for you." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Beth," I smiled. She held up her left hand, wiggling her fingers so the massive emerald-cut diamond flashed in the light. "Spencer surprised me today. He booked the Amalfi Coast for the honeymoon, A private yacht for 3 weeks. Can you believe it? He's a very generous man, I noted, taking a sip of my champagne. Across the room, I made eye contact with Spencer. He was standing with a group of investors, holding a scotch, but his face looked slightly gray. The charming smile was there, but the eyes were frantic. He knew his liquidity was drying up. He knew the SEC was sniffing around. And he was desperately hoping this marriage into the Gallagher family would unlock my father's emergency capital. I walked over to the bar, deliberately crossing paths with Spencer's mother, Felicity Harrington. Felicity was a terrifying, icy socialite who had never liked me because I asked too many questions. She preferred Bethany because Bethany was easily manipulated. "Chloe," Felicity said, giving me a tight, condescending nod. "It takes a lot of maturity to be here tonight." "Felicity," I replied smoothly. "It's a beautiful party. Spencer really spared no expense." "He never does," she said proudly. "He only settles for the best." I leaned in just a fraction, keeping my voice a soft, conspiratorial whisper. "He truly doesn't. Though I heard from an acquaintance at the Federal Reserve that liquidity is getting tight across the board for boutique hedge funds. I hope Apex is weathering the storm." Felicity's fake smile twitched. "Apex is stronger than ever. I don't know who you've been speaking to, Chloe, but I suggest you ignore petty rumors." "Of course," I smiled pleasantly. "Enjoy the evening." I walked away, my heart doing a satisfied little flutter. The seeds of doubt were planted. The walls were closing in on Spencer Harrington. And Bethany was too busy picking out linen napkins to notice she was standing on the tracks directly in the path of a speeding freight train. The wedding was set for June. It was going to be the social event of the season. I couldn't wait for the disaster. By February, the city was buried under a thick blanket of gray slush. But inside the Gallagher estate, the climate was purely tropical, fueled by Bethany's feverish wedding planning. In my first life, the wedding planning had been a source of constant friction. Spencer had always been remarkably stingy with our wedding budget, citing aggressive portfolio expansion and the need to maintain liquid capital. I had compromised agreeing to a modest country club affair. But Bethany didn't compromise. And Spencer, terrified that a sudden display of frugality would alert my father to his crumbling financial empire, accommodated her every absurd whim. Bethany's vision board wasn't just a wedding, it was a coronation. Sitting in the conservatory one Sunday afternoon, I watched my sister aggressively tap her manicured fingernail against an iPad screen, lecturing our mother and a highly stressed wedding planner named Penelope. "I don't care if the white peonies have to be flown in from Holland. Penelope," Bethany huffed, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Spencer said the floral budget is unlimited. We need the archway to look like a cascading waterfall of white and gold. Oh, and the crystal chargers for the tables, make sure they are the Baccarat ones, not the cheap knockoffs we saw at the St. Regis." Penelope, looking visibly defeated, scribbled furiously on her clipboard. "Of course, Bethany, I will call the distributor in Paris. But you should know the Baccarat chargers will add another $80,000 to the rental fee. Spencer will wire the deposit on Monday," Bethany said, dismissively, taking a sip of her mimosa. She caught me watching her from over the top of my novel and offered a sickly, sweet, patronizing smile. "You don't mind, do you, Chloe? I know you were planning to use the local florist for your wedding, but Spencer really wants this to be an unforgettable event. He says I deserve a fairy tale." I turned the page of my book, my expression serene. "Not at all, Beth. If Spencer has the capital to burn, you should absolutely spend it. A man's willingness to invest in his wedding is a direct reflection of his success." That was the trigger word. Success. What Bethany didn't know, what no one in that room knew, except me and my accountant Jason Miller, was that Spencer didn't have the capital. Apex Capital was bleeding out. Two major institutional investors had quietly pulled their funds in late January, spooked by market whispers. To cover those withdrawals, Spencer had been forced to liquidate his remaining legitimate assets at a massive loss. Now he was entirely reliant on new money coming in to pay off the old money, and the biggest whale he was trying to hook was our father. Later that evening, I walked past my father's home office and heard the low, tense murmur of voices. The heavy oak door was left open just a crack. I paused, pressing my back against the silk wallpapered hallway, and listened. "I'm telling you, Robert, it's an unprecedented opportunity." Spencer's voice floated through the gap, sounding uncharacteristically strained. "The biomedical tech firm in Geneva is ready to go public in Q3. If we inject $20 million now, the pre-IPO valuation will triple our investment by Christmas. $20 million is a significant liquid pull, Spencer." My father replied, his tone cautious but intrigued. "Especially after I just covered the $500,000 deposit for Bethany's venue at the New York Public Library. I thought your fund was swimming in surplus this quarter. We are, Spencer lied smoothly, though I could hear the slight tremor of panic beneath his polished veneer. "But my capital is locked up in the Asian markets until the fiscal year ends. This bridge loan from you would just expedite the Geneva deal. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a guaranteed home run for the family. The family." He was playing my father like a fiddle, using his new status as the future son-in-law to bypass my father's usual rigorous financial vetting. "Let me look over the prospectus," my father finally sighed. "If the numbers make sense, I'll have my bankers wire the $20 million by Friday." I closed my eyes, a cold, dark satisfaction blooming in my chest. In my past life, I had burst into that room screaming that Spencer was a liar and a thief, only to be dragged out by my father, who accused me of trying to sabotage my sister's happiness. This time, I walked silently away, letting my father sign his own financial death warrant. If he wanted to buy Spencer's lies, he could pay the price. My $80 million was safely locked in an untraceable blind trust in Delaware. As for Spencer, he was shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, and the water was already lapping at his ankles. By late April, the stress of the impending implosion was physically rotting Spencer from the inside out. He had lost weight, his usually perfectly tailored suits hanging slightly loose on his frame. The charming boyish glow that had captivated Bethany was replaced by dark, heavy bags under his eyes and a terrifyingly short temper. The cracks in their perfect romance began to fracture publicly during Bethany's extravagant bridal shower at the Pierre Hotel. The room was a suffocating explosion of pink roses-tiered macaron towers and 50 of New York's most judgmental socialites. Bethany sat in a velvet throne chair, surrounded by piles of expensive gifts glowing under the attention. I sat near the back, sipping sparkling water, watching the performance. Everything was going perfectly until Spencer arrived to make his customary surprise appearance at the end of the shower. He burst through the double doors of the banquet room, completely ignoring the enthusiastic applause of the guests. His face was flushed red, his tie was loosened, and he was gripping his cell phone so hard his knuckles were white. He marched directly up to Bethany, leaning down and hissing something in her ear. The room went dead silent. We could all see Bethany's smile falter, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "Spencer, not now," she whispered back, trying to maintain her poise. "People are watching. I don't give a damn who is watching." Spencer suddenly barked, his voice carrying across the silent, floral-scented room. I told you not to use the Platinum Amex for the caterer. I specifically told you to wait until Monday. Bethany shrank back in her throne, her face burning with humiliation as 50 pairs of wealthy, gossiping eyes locked onto them. It was just 100,000, Spencer. Penelope said they needed the final deposit today, or we lose the truffles. I don't care about the truffles, you stupid spoiled. Spencer caught himself looking up and realizing the entire room of high society women, including his terrifying mother Felicity and my mother Margaret, were staring at him in frozen horror. He swallowed hard, running a shaking hand through his hair. The mask slammed back into place, though it was crooked. I apologize, Spencer announced to the room, forcing a hollow, terrifyingly fake laugh. Work stress. The markets are chaotic today. Bethany, darling, I'm sorry. We'll discuss it at home. Thank you all for celebrating my beautiful bride. He turned and practically fled the room. The silence he left behind was deafening. My mother rushed forward to comfort a now teary Bethany, while the rest of the guests immediately began whispering behind their crystal champagne flutes. Credit card issues, shouting at his bride, calling her stupid. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and walked over to my sister. She was trembling, gripping a silver Tiffany serving platter someone had just gifted her. He didn't mean it, Bethany babbled to our mother, desperate to salvage the fantasy. He's just managing $1 billion merger right now. He's under so much pressure. It's my fault. I should have listened to him about the card. Oh, sweetie, don't say that, I cooed, placing a gentle, comforting hand on her shoulder. My voice was loud enough for the gossiping women nearby to hear. Spencer is a titan of industry. Men like him just have passionate tempers. You know how volatile Wall Street is right now. You just have to be his piece. I fed her the exact toxic enabling garbage she wanted to hear. You're right, Chloe. Bethany sniffled, looking up at me with profound relief. It was the first time she had looked at me without smug superiority in months. She needed me to validate her terrible choice. He's just stressed. Once the wedding is over and we're on the yacht in Amalfi, he'll be back to his normal self. Exactly, I smiled, patting her shoulder. You just focus on walking down that aisle. Everything else will take care of itself. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Any sane woman would have seen the glaring neon red flags whipping in the wind. A declined platinum card for a man who supposedly managed billions. A public aggressive outburst over a catering deposit. But Bethany couldn't pull the ripcord. She had stolen her older sister's fiancé. She had paraded him around as her grand prize. If she canceled the wedding now, she would be the laughingstock of Manhattan. Her ego was the anchor tied to her feet, and I was just cheerfully waving at her from the boat as she dragged herself into the abyss. The next morning, my private investigator, Gregory Holt, sent me a secure message. Target's COO. Miles Preston just checked into a rehab clinic in Connecticut under a false name. He's running. Also, the SEC has quietly frozen Apex Capital's secondary offshore accounts. The walls are touching his shoulders. I deleted the message and went downstairs to help my mother pick out her corsage. June 11th, the night before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner was held at the River House, an exclusive members-only club overlooking the East River. It was a muggy, oppressive summer evening, the kind of weather where the air feels heavy enough to drown in. The atmosphere inside the private dining room was even more suffocating. On the surface, it looked like a triumph. 70 of our closest friends and family eating caviar and drinking vintage Bordeaux. But if you looked closely, the rotting foundation was completely exposed. Spencer sat at the head of the long, candlelit table, looking like a dead man walking. His skin had a waxy, grayish pallor, He was sweating through his bespoke shirt, knocking back glasses of scotch with a frantic, rhythmic desperation. Every 3 minutes his phone would buzz on the table. He would stare at the screen, flinch, and shove the phone into his pocket without answering. Bethany, draped in a backless white silk slip dress, was desperately playing the glowing bride, ignoring the fact that her groom looked like he was about to face a firing squad. I was seated near the middle of the table, perfectly positioned to observe the carnage. I watched my father lean over to Spencer, clapping him on the shoulder. "Spencer, my boy." My father boomed, slightly drunk on his own importance. "I spoke to my bankers today. The 20 million is locked in for the Geneva deal. You should see the transfer hit your primary Apex accounts by 9 a.m. tomorrow." I watched Spencer's eyes dilate. A sickening wave of profound relief washed over his face, so intense he almost looked faint. "Thank you, Robert," Spencer choked out, gripping my father's hand. "You have no idea what this means. It's going to secure the future. All of our futures. He needs that 20 million to pay out the angry investors, threatening to go to the authorities tomorrow." I realized, piecing the timeline together. He's planning to use my father's money to plug the holes in the dam, just to buy himself enough time to get on that plane to the Amalfi Coast. Once they were in international waters, Spencer would likely disappear, leaving Bethany stranded in Italy, and my father holding the bag for a massive federal fraud case. "Excuse me, I needed some fresh air." I slipped out through the French doors onto the stone terrace overlooking the river. The dark water churned below, reminding me of the freezing depths that had claimed my life 2 years ago. I took a deep breath, relishing the warmth of the summer night. A moment later, the door clicked open. Spencer stumbled out onto the terrace. He didn't see me standing in the shadows of the trellis. He pulled out his phone, his hand shaking so violently he dropped it on the stone pavers. He cursed, scooped it up, and dialed a number. "Richard, it's me!" Spencer hissed into the phone, pacing like a caged animal. "Listen to me, you have to stall the agents. I know they have the subpoenas. But Gallagher is wiring 20 million tomorrow at 9 a.m. As soon as it hits the Apex account, route 15 million to the Shell Corp in Panama and use the rest to pay off the 2 whistleblowers. Yes. Yes. I know it's highly illegal. Richard, the whole damn thing is illegal." He paused, raking his free hand over his face, pulling at his own skin. "Just get me through the wedding ceremony tomorrow at 2 o'clock. By 4 o'clock, we'll be heading to Teterboro for the private jet. Once I'm in the air, they can't touch me. Just buy me 24 hours. He hung up, leaning heavily against the stone balustrade, gasping for air. I stepped out of the shadows. Pre-wedding jitters, Spencer. He spun around, letting out a startled yelp, his eyes wide with absolute terror. When he saw it was me, the fear morphed into defensive rage. "Chloe, what the hell are you doing out here, sneaking around, eavesdropping?" "Just enjoying the view," I said, calmly, walking over to the railing and standing next to him. I looked out at the dark river. "You know, Spencer, I had a nightmare once. I dreamt I was trapped in a sinking car, drowning in the dark. And you were standing on the shore, watching me die." Spencer stared at me, completely, entirely unnerved. The alcohol and the terror were stripping away his sanity. "What is wrong with you? Why are you talking about drowning on the night before my wedding? Just a metaphor." I smiled, turning to look at his pale, sweating face. "Because looking at you right now, Spencer, you look exactly like a man who is drowning, and the water is right up to your chin." He opened his mouth to scream at me, to unleash the violent temper I knew lurked beneath his skin, but the French doors swung open again. "There you are," Bethany chimed, stepping onto the terrace, clutching a glass of champagne. She looked between the two of us, a sudden flash of ugly, jealous paranoia crossing her face. "What are you two talking about out here in the dark?" "Nothing, darling," Spencer said instantly, his voice cracking. He rushed over to her, wrapping an arm around her waist like she was a life raft. Chloe was just giving me her final congratulations. Bethany sneered at me, her confidence returning now that Spencer was by her side. "Well, thank you, Chloe. It's time for the toasts. Come on, Spencer." As they turned to walk back inside, I spoke up, my voice cutting through the humid night air. "Bethany," she stopped looking over her shoulder. "If you ever wanted to walk away," I said softly, looking her dead in the eye, offering her the final, undeniable chance to save herself. "If you ever felt like something was wrong, tonight is the night to pack a bag and leave. No one would blame you. I would even help you." Bethany's face contorted into a mask of pure, vicious triumph. She thought I was begging. She thought I was making a desperate 11th hour attempt to break them up, because I was still secretly in love with the man she stole. "Are you pathetic, Chloe?" Bethany laughed, a cruel ringing sound. "I am marrying the love of my life tomorrow. He is brilliant, he is wealthy, and he chose me. Get over it. It's embarrassing." She pulled Spencer through the doors, slamming them shut behind her. I stood alone on the terrace, a genuine, terrifying smile spreading across my face. I thought, pulling my phone from my clutch. I opened a secure messaging app and typed a quick note to Jason Miller, my accountant. "Jason, first thing tomorrow morning before the banks open, I need you to file an emergency injunction on my father's accounts. Block the $20 million wire transfer to Apex Capital. Cite suspected elder financial abuse if you have to. Just freeze his money," Jason replied less than a minute later. "Consider it done. It will lock up the funds for at least 48 hours. Spencer won't get a dime." I slipped the phone back into my bag and looked up at the stars. Tomorrow the grand facade would collapse. Tomorrow Bethany would get exactly what she asked for. Tomorrow was going to be a beautiful day for a wedding. The morning of June 12th dawned with brilliant, cloudless perfection. It was exactly the kind of summer day money could supposedly buy, bright, breezy, and bathed in golden light. Inside the penthouse bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel, the atmosphere was a chaotic symphony of hairspray clinking champagne glasses and frantic manicurists. Bethany was holding court in the center of the room, draped in a white silk robe trimmed with ostrich feathers. Her custom Vera Wang gown, a cascade of tulle and hand-stitched pearls that cost more than a starter home, hung suspended from the chandelier like a conquering banner. I sat by the window sipping a black coffee, a silent observer in the theater of the absurd. "More volume at the crown, please," Bethany commanded her stylist, a nervous woman who had been working on my sister's blonde hair for over 2 hours. "Spencer is 3 inches taller than me, and I need the silhouette to be perfectly balanced for the aisle photos." My mother, Margaret, was weeping softly into a monogrammed handkerchief. "You look like an angel, Bethany, simply an angel. I just know Spencer is going to burst into tears the moment he sees you. He better—" Bethany laughed, though the sound was sharp and brittle. She looked over at me via the reflection in her vanity mirror. "Chloe, are you just going to sit there? My bridesmaids are already dressed. You need to put on your gown. And please do something about your makeup. You look terribly pale." "I'll get ready in a moment, Beth," I replied smoothly, checking my phone. "I'm just waiting on a very important email regarding a delivery." That wasn't a lie. I was waiting for confirmation from Jason. At exactly 9:02 a.m., my phone vibrated in my palm. Sender Jason Miller. Injunction filed and accepted by the state magistrate at 8:45 a.m. Your father's accounts are temporarily frozen, pending the elder abuse/fraud inquiry. The $20 million wire transfer to Apex Capital has been flagged and hard-stopped by the Federal Clearinghouse. Spencer is completely locked out. I stared at the glowing screen, a slow, intoxicating warmth spreading through my chest. The trap wasn't just closed. The lock was thrown, and the key was at the bottom of the ocean. I decided to take a little stroll. I'm going to run down to Spencer's suite, I announced, standing up and smoothing my slacks. Dad asked me to give him the family cufflinks before the photographer arrives. Oh, don't you dare ruin his mood, Chloe, Bethany snapped, her insecurity flaring instantly. Just drop them with his groomsmen and leave. I don't want any weird energy between you two today. Strictly a drop-off, I promised, offering a tight, pacifying smile. Spencer's suite was 3 floors down. When I stepped off the elevator, I could already hear the shouting. The heavy mahogany door to his room was slightly ajar. I pushed it open silently and stepped into the foyer. The groomsmen were nowhere to be seen, likely banished to the hotel bar. Spencer was entirely alone in the massive living area, fully dressed in his tuxedo trousers and an unbuttoned dress shirt. He was pacing violently, pressing his phone to his ear, his face the color of wet ash. "What do you mean, halted?" Spencer screamed, spit flying from his lips. He kicked a heavy leather ottoman, sending it crashing into a glass coffee table. "Richard, the wire was authorized yesterday. Gallagher signed the papers. It's $20 million. It doesn't just evaporate." A tinny, panicked voice buzzed from the phone speaker. "I don't care about a fraud inquiry," Spencer roared, tearing at his own hair. "You call the bank manager right now. Tell them it's a mistake. If that money isn't in the offshore account by noon, the whistleblowers are going to the regional director of the SEC. Do you understand me? I am going to prison. Richard. They will raid the office." I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms, and watched him unravel. It was a beautiful, chaotic dance. The anatomy of a collapse. 9 a.m. The expected $20 million lifeline is severed. 9:15 a.m. The realization that the offshore escape fund is empty. 9:30 a.m. The inescapable truth that the private jet to Amalfi is grounded due to non-payment of fuel and hangar fees. 10 a.m. The absolute certainty that the federal authorities are no longer a distant threat, but an incoming reality. Spencer threw his phone across the room. It shattered against the flocked wallpaper. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands, his breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. "Bad time?" I asked softly. Spencer violently jerked his head up. When he saw me standing there perfectly calm, his eyes widened with absolute feral panic. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I said, walking slowly into the room. I retrieved the small velvet box containing my father's vintage cufflinks from my pocket and tossed it onto the sofa next to him. "Dad wanted you to have these. A welcome to the family." Spencer stared at the box as if it were a venomous snake. He looked back up at me, his chest heaving. You knew. You knew about the wire transfer." "Spencer, I know about everything," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "I know about the Cayman Island subsidiaries. I know about the cooked books. I know about the COO in rehab. I even know about the $2 million you lost gambling in Macau last winter." His jaw dropped. He looked utterly destroyed. What are you?" "I'm the woman you should have never crossed," I whispered, leaning over him, making sure he felt the absolute chill of my presence. "You thought you could use my family as your personal ATM. You thought you could sleep with my sister to get to my father's vault. But my father's money isn't coming, Spencer. You are completely, utterly broke. Chloe, please, Spencer begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. Tears welled in his eyes, ruining his expensive grooming. Please, if you know a way to release the funds, you have to help me. I'll call off the wedding. I'll leave Bethany right now. I never loved her. She was just an asset. I'll do whatever you want. There it was, the ultimate betrayal. Less than 4 hours before she was set to walk down the aisle, he was willing to throw my sister into the dirt just to save his own skin. I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. Why would I do that, Spencer? You two are perfect for each other. Now button up your shirt. You have a wedding to attend. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving him to suffocate in his own collapsing world. The New York Public Library had been transformed into a cathedral of exorbitant stolen wealth. Thousands of white orchids cascaded down the grand marble staircases. A 50-piece string orchestra played softly from the upper mezzanine, their music echoing through the cavernous historic halls. 500 guests representing the absolute pinnacle of Manhattan's elite sat in gilded Chiavari chairs, murmuring in anticipation. I stood at the altar in my emerald green bridesmaid dress, a poetic irony, considering it was the color Bethany wore the night she decided to steal my life. At 2 p.m. precisely, the heavy wooden doors swung open. The orchestra swelled, playing a dramatic, custom-arranged processional. The crowd stood turning to watch. Bethany looked breathtaking. I will give her that. The Vera Wang gown caught the light beautifully, and she floated down the aisle on our father's arm like a genuine princess. Her face was flushed with triumph, a brilliant smile plastered across her features as she absorbed the envy and admiration of the room. She looked at Spencer, expecting to see a man overwhelmed by her beauty. Instead, she saw a ghost. Spencer stood at the end of the aisle, looking physically ill. His tuxedo was impeccable, but his face was slick with a cold sweat. He was swaying slightly on his feet, his eyes darting frantically toward the side exits of the library. He looked like an animal caught in a snare, gnawing off its own leg to escape. When Bethany reached the altar, my father handed her over to Spencer. Spencer barely took her hand. His grip was limp and trembling. Bethany's smile faltered slightly. She whispered something to him, likely asking if he was okay, but he didn't respond. He just stared blankly ahead. The officiant, a distinguished federal judge who was a friend of my father's, stepped forward and cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in this magnificent setting to witness the union of Spencer Harrington and Bethany Gallagher. Marriage is an institution built on absolute trust, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud. The ceremony dragged on for 20 excruciating minutes. Spencer kept checking his Rolex, his desperation mounting with every passing second. He knew the banks were closing in. He knew the whistleblowers had likely already made their calls. He was just praying he could say, I do get through the reception and somehow flee the state. And now, the officiant smiled, holding his hands out. Spencer and Bethany will exchange their vows. Bethany turned to Spencer, her eyes shining with fake, rehearsed emotion. Spencer, from the moment we met, I knew my life would never be the same. You brought me a kind of richness I had never known. Richness indeed, I thought. You are my protector, my provider, and my soulmate. Bethany continued placing the ring on his shaking finger. It was Spencer's turn. He opened his mouth, but before a single word could escape his dry lips, a sound echoed through the massive hall. It wasn't a romantic sigh from the crowd. It was the heavy, terrifying slam of the library's main doors being shoved open with violent force. The string orchestra screeched to a halt, a discordant scrape of bows against strings. 500 guests gasped and turned in unison. Marching down the central aisle of the New York Public Library were 12 men and women in dark suits, their faces grim and unyielding. The man at the front, a tall, broad-shouldered agent, held a thick leather folder in his hand. Pinned to his belt was a gleaming silver badge. Behind them, local NYPD officers secured the exits. "Spencer Harrington!" The lead agent's voice boomed, echoing off the marble ceiling. It was the voice of God delivering judgment. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Remain exactly where you are." Total absolute pandemonium erupted. Women screamed. Men shouted in confusion. My mother collapsed back into her gilded chair, clutching her chest. My father surged forward, his face purple with outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" my father roared, stepping between the agents and the altar. "This is a private, closed event. I demand you leave immediately." "Step aside, Mr. Gallagher," the lead FBI agent said, coldly flashing his badge. "We have federal warrants for the arrest of Spencer Harrington on 72 counts of wire fraud securities, fraud money laundering, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." The words hit the room like a bomb. Securities fraud. RICO. Spencer didn't try to defend himself. He didn't puff out his chest or demand to call his lawyer. He simply shattered. He dropped Bethany's hand, took 2 steps back, and tripped over the train of her Vera Wang dress, falling hard onto his back on the marble floor. Bethany was paralyzed. She looked down at the man she had stolen, the man she had worshipped as a titan of industry, now scrambling backward like a pathetic coward. "Get up!" an agent shouted, hauling Spencer to his feet and violently wrenching his arms behind his back. The sharp click-click of handcuffs echoed loudly in the stunned silence. Wait, you don't understand," Spencer shrieked, struggling against the cuffs, tears streaming down his face, completely abandoning any shred of dignity. "It wasn't just me, I didn't do this alone." "Spencer, what is going on?" Bethany screamed, finally finding her voice. She grabbed his arm, her perfect blonde curls bouncing in distress. "Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them—" Spencer looked at my sister. The desperation in his eyes morphed into a vicious, calculated malice. If he was going down, he was going to take human shields with him. "Tell them—" Spencer spat his voice, echoing for the entire room to hear. "You tell them, Bethany. You're the one who signed the Shell Corporation documents. You're the registered co-signer on the Cayman accounts." She knew everything. She helped me forge the wire transfers. The entire cathedral of high society gasped collectively. 500 pairs of eyes instantly snapped from Spencer to Bethany. Bethany froze the blood draining from her face until she looked like a marble statue. What are you talking about? I just signed the papers for the honeymoon yacht and the house in the Hamptons. You signed as the executive director of a fraudulent holding company, Ms. Gallagher. The lead FBI agent said, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. He stepped toward my sister. "Bethany Gallagher, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and accessory to money laundering." "No!" My mother screamed, trying to run toward the altar, only to be held back by my father, who looked utterly destroyed, his entire world collapsing in real time. "No, wait! I didn't read them. He told me to sign them." Bethany shrieked hysterically as the agent grabbed her wrists. She fought wildly, the delicate pearl straps of her Vera Wang gown snapping as they forced her hands behind her back. "I didn't know, Chloe, Dad, tell them I didn't know." She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified, pleading pools of blue. She was begging her older sister to save her, just like she always did. I took one step forward. The room was deathly quiet, save for Bethany's sobbing. I looked deep into her eyes, ensuring she saw the absolute frozen void where my mercy used to be. "I'm sorry, Bethany," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the altar. "But, as the officiant just said, marriage is built on absolute transparency. You two share everything, even the consequences." Bethany let out an ear-piercing wail of pure agony as the agents dragged her and Spencer down the aisle. The procession of ruin marched right past the massive towers of white orchids, past the stunned, silent elite of Manhattan, and out into the blazing summer sun, where a row of black federal SUVs was waiting. The grand doors slammed shut behind them, leaving the library in a state of apocalyptic shock. I calmly walked over to the side table, picked up a glass of untouched champagne, and took a slow, deliberate sip. It tasted absolutely exquisite. The fallout over the next 6 months was the stuff of legendary Manhattan gossip. It was a scandal that devoured the front pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post with equal ferocity. Spencer Harrington's trial was an incredibly brief affair. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the absolute desertion of his high-powered legal team, once his funds were frozen, he folded. He pleaded guilty to operating a $1.2 billion Ponzi scheme. The judge, disgusted by the sheer arrogance and predatory nature of the fraud, sentenced him to 25 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Bethany's fate was a different kind of tragic. She didn't go to federal prison. Our father, terrified of the Gallagher name being completely annihilated, hired the most ruthless, expensive criminal defense attorneys in the country. They successfully argued that Bethany was an unwitting, naive pawn, manipulated by a mastermind. They painted her as stupid, easily controlled, and legally ignorant. It kept her out of a cell, but it cost her everything else. She was slapped with 5 years of highly restrictive federal probation. But the real punishment was the social execution. The elite circles of New York slammed their doors in her face. The women who had attended her bridal shower now crossed the street when they saw her. She was a pariah, the spoiled, foolish girl who almost brought down her own family to marry a crook. Stripped of her trust fund, which my father froze as punishment for her extreme negligence, and suffocated by her ruined reputation, Bethany was forced to move into a tiny drab apartment in Queens. The designer clothes, the private jets, the Baccarat crystal chargers. All of it was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of public humiliation and a minimum wage job at a local bakery to pay her legal restitution fees. My parents were broken by the ordeal, my father realizing how close he had come to losing $20 million, and perhaps his entire company, finally looked at the financial records. He discovered the injunction Jason Miller had filed on my behalf. He realized that while Bethany was busy enabling a thief, I had been the sole architect of the family's financial salvation. One evening, he called me into his office. The arrogance that usually defined him was gone, replaced by a weary, aging humility. "You saved us, Chloe," he said quietly, staring into the fireplace. "You saw the truth when we were all blinded by the spectacle. I owe you an apology, a profound one." "You don't owe me anything, Dad," I replied, standing by the door. "I just protected what was mine. I suggest you learn to do the same. I didn't stay to rebuild the family dynamic. I had given them my life once before, and they had let me drown. This time, I owed them nothing. With my $80 million completely secure and legally detached from the Gallagher family trust, I left New York. I moved to the coast of Maine, buying a stunning glass-walled house overlooking the crashing ocean. I invested in sustainable tech startups, tripled my net worth in 2 years, and surrounded myself with people who valued loyalty over luxury. On the 2-year anniversary of the day I woke up in that hotel room, I stood on the deck of my coastal home, holding a mug of coffee. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and the air smelled of salt and pine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email alert with a Google News update for a name I still tracked out of sheer morbid curiosity. Headline: Disgraced Wall Street. Wife Bethany Gallagher denied appeal to lift restitution payments. Attached was a paparazzi photo of my sister looking exhausted, wearing a faded coat, carrying a bag of groceries through the slushy streets of Queens. There was no emerald-cut diamond, no glowing smile, just the heavy, miserable reality of the bed she had so desperately fought to make. I looked out at the vast, churning ocean. The water was cold, dark, and deep. In another life, it was my grave, but not this time. This time I let the dead weight sink and I swam to the surface. Rebirth isn't about second chances to fix your mistakes. It's about having the clarity to realize you weren't the one making the mistakes in the first place. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to an enemy isn't to fight them. It's to give them exactly what they want and watch them choke on it. Watching Bethany's desperate tear-streaked face as the FBI eventually raided her dream wedding reception was the sweetest champagne I've ever tasted. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting your hands dirty. It's just stepping out of the way, pouring yourself a drink, and letting the trash take itself out. What would you have done in my shoes? Warned the sister who betrayed you, or sat back and let her burn? Let me know in the comments below. If you couldn't get enough of this sweet karma, smash that like button, share this story with a friend who loves drama, and hit subscribe so you never miss a wild ride.